Little girl begs Mafia boss to save her mom. You won't believe what he did. The rain fell in sheets against the windows of Salvatore Ricci's office as 8-year-old Emma Matthews stood before him, soaked to the bone, her small fists clenched at her sides. "Please, sir," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "They say you're the only one who can help my mommy." The feared Mafia boss stared at the child, his expression unreadable. What happened next would change both their lives forever. Hey viewers! If you're already feeling that tug at your heartstrings, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to see more incredible stories of unexpected heroes and the moments that redefine lives. Now, let's dive deeper into this extraordinary tale. Emma Matthews had always been told to stay away from the imposing building at the end of Mulberry Street. The locals called it the Lion's Den, and everyone knew it belonged to Salvatore Ricci, the most powerful man in the city. Not powerful like the mayor or the police chief, powerful in ways that weren't discussed in polite company. Emma's mother, Sarah, was a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital. A single mother who worked double shifts to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. She was everything to Emma, her hero, her best friend, her entire world. Which is why, when Sarah collapsed during her shift 3 days ago, Emma's world shattered. Acute myeloid leukemia, the doctors had said, their voices low as they spoke outside Sarah's hospital room. Emma didn't understand the words, but she understood the grave expressions, the pitying glances thrown her way. She understood when they said her mother needed an experimental treatment that their insurance wouldn't cover, a treatment that cost more money than they could ever hope to have. "There's nothing we can do," the hospital administrator had told Emma's Aunt Maggie, who had come to stay with her. "Unless you can find $300,000 in the next 2 weeks, we've done all we can." That night, Emma had overheard her aunt on the phone. "It's hopeless," Maggie had sobbed. "The only person in this city with that kind of money who might give it away is Salvatore Ricci, and we all know he's a monster. A monster with money." That was all Emma needed to know. Which is how, on this stormy Tuesday afternoon, Emma Matthews found herself standing in Salvatore Ricci's office, having slipped away from her aunt and navigated the dangerous streets alone, determined to save the only person who mattered to her. Salvatore Ricci was not a man accustomed to being surprised. At 53, he had seen everything the underworld had to offer. He had built his empire through calculated decisions, unwavering loyalty to his own, and merciless treatment of his enemies. His name alone was enough to make grown men tremble. Yet here was this tiny slip of a girl, her blonde hair plastered to her face from the rain, standing before him without a trace of fear. "How did you get in here?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I told the man at the door that I needed to see you," Emma replied simply. He laughed at first, but then I showed him this. She pulled out a crumpled photograph from her pocket, a picture of her mother in her nurse's uniform. "I told him my mommy saved his grandma last year at the hospital." He remembered her. Salvatore raised an eyebrow. Marco, his most trusted guard, had let this child through? He would have words with him later. But for now. "What's your name, little one?" "Emma Matthews, sir." "I'm 8.5. "And what makes you think I can help your mother, Emma Matthews, who is 8.5? Emma's chin trembled slightly, but her gaze remained steady. "My Aunt Maggie said you're the only one with enough money who might give it away. My mommy needs a special medicine that costs $300,000, or she's going to die. Please, sir. She's all I have." Something shifted in Salvatore's expression, so subtle that most adults would have missed it, but Emma didn't. For just a moment, the hardness in his eyes softened, and Emma saw something she recognized: pain. "Go home, child," he said finally. "This is no place for you." "I can't," Emma replied, her voice breaking. "Not without help from my mommy." Salvatore stood from behind his massive desk and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked city, his city. For decades, he had ruled through fear and power. People came to him for loans, for protection, for favors that required his particular brand of persuasion. They never came asking for charity. Except once. 25 years ago. "What's your mother's name?" he asked without turning around. "Sarah Matthews. She's a nurse at St. Mary's. She helps people every day, sir. She's the best person I know." Salvatore turned, his expression unreadable again. "Wait here." He left Emma alone in his office for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. When he returned, he was accompanied by a slender man in an expensive suit who carried a laptop. "Show me," Salvatore commanded. The man opened his laptop and typed rapidly. "Sarah Matthews, 34, nurse at St. Mary's for the past 12 years. Diagnosed 3 days ago with acute myeloid leukemia. Candidate for the Miyazaki treatment protocol, but insurance denied coverage as it's still experimental. Prognosis without treatment, 2 months, maybe less." Salvatore nodded once, and the man closed his laptop and left without another word. "Your mother," Salvatore said slowly, "does she know you're here?" Emma shook her head. "She's sleeping a lot now. Aunt Maggie is watching me, but I sneaked out." "I see." Salvatore returned to his desk and sat down heavily. "Emma Matthews, do you know who I am? What I do?" "You're Mr. Ricci. People are scared of you. But my friend Joey at school says you help people sometimes, if they're from the neighborhood." Salvatore almost smiled. The simplicity of children, reducing his complex criminal empire to helping people sometimes. "Your mother," he said carefully. "Was she born here? In this neighborhood?" Emma nodded eagerly. "She grew up on Maple Street. Grandma and Grandpa lived there until they died." Something flickered across Salvatore's face, recognition, perhaps. "Matthews wasn't always her name, was it?" "No, sir. That was my daddy's name, but he left when I was a baby. Mommy's name used to be Rossi. Sarah Rossi." The office fell silent except for the sound of rain against the windows. Salvatore's face had gone pale. "Rossi," he repeated softly. "Antonio Rossi's daughter?" Emma nodded, confused by his reaction. "That was my grandpa's name. He died before I was born." Salvatore stood abruptly, startling Emma. He walked to a painting on the wall, a landscape of Sicily, and swung it aside to reveal a safe. His fingers moved quickly over the combination lock, and he retrieved a small, worn leather book. He flipped through the pages until he found what he was looking for. His finger traced over a name written there, and for a moment, Emma thought she saw his hand tremble. "Your grandfather," Salvatore said, his voice different now, softer somehow. "He was a good man." "Mommy says he was the best," Emma agreed. "She says I have his smile." Salvatore closed the book and returned it to the safe. When he turned back to Emma, his decision was made. "Emma Matthews, I want you to listen carefully. I'm going to help your mother." Emma's eyes widened, hope blooming across her face. "Really? You'll give us the money for her medicine?" "I'll do more than that," Salvatore replied. "I'm going to make sure she gets the very best doctors, the very best treatment. Not just this experimental protocol, everything she needs." Tears filled Emma's eyes. "Why? Why would you help us?" Salvatore knelt down to her level, his knees protesting the movement. Up close, Emma could see the lines of his face, the gray at his temples, the weight of years in his eyes. "Because a very long time ago, your grandfather saved my life," he said simply. "And in our world, in the old ways, a debt like that is never forgotten." What Emma couldn't know, what Salvatore would never tell her, was that Antonio Rossi had taken a bullet meant for a young Salvatore during a turf war in the 1980s. Antonio, who had wanted no part of the family business, who had chosen to become a carpenter instead of following his own father into the organization. Antonio, who had extracted a promise from Salvatore that day as he bled out in his arms, that Salvatore would make sure his young daughter Sarah would never know about their connection, would never be touched by their world. A promise Salvatore had kept for decades, watching from afar as Sarah grew up, went to nursing school, married, unwisely, in his opinion, and had a daughter of her own. He had respected Antonio's wishes, keeping his distance, ensuring no harm came to them but never interfering in their lives. Until now. "I don't understand," Emma said, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. "You don't need to," Salvatore replied, standing again. "All you need to know is that your mother will get the help she needs." He pressed a button on his desk, and moments later, Marco appeared at the door. "Take the car. Drive Miss Matthews home to her aunt. Make sure she gets inside safely." Marco nodded, but Emma hesitated. "How do I know you'll really help my mommy?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. Salvatore reached into his desk drawer and removed a business card. On the back, he wrote something and handed it to Emma. "Give this to your aunt. Tell her to call this number tomorrow morning. Everything will be arranged." Emma took the card carefully, as if it were made of gold. "Thank you, Mr. Ricci. I knew you weren't really a monster." Salvatore's expression remained impassive, but something in his eyes changed. "Go home now, little one. Your mother needs you." As Marco led Emma from the office, Salvatore returned to the window, watching as they emerged from the building below. The rain had stopped, and a weak sun was breaking through the clouds. He watched until the black sedan disappeared around the corner, carrying Emma Matthews back to her life, a life that would now continue with her mother in it, if he had anything to say about it. And Salvatore Ricci always had something to say about what happened in his city. The next morning, Sarah Matthews' hospital room was a flurry of activity. New doctors had arrived, specialists from New York and Boston. The hospital administrator who had been so dismissive days earlier was now personally overseeing her case, assuring Aunt Maggie that everything has been taken care of. When Sarah was strong enough to ask questions, she was told only that an anonymous benefactor had covered all expenses and arranged for the best care possible. The experimental treatment would begin immediately. Emma kept Mr. Ricci's card hidden in her treasure box, under her bed. She never told anyone about her visit to the lion's den, not even her mother. Some secrets, she understood instinctively, were meant to be kept. Weeks passed, and Sarah began to respond to the treatment. Color returned to her cheeks, strength to her limbs. The doctors were cautiously optimistic, then openly hopeful, then finally confident. The cancer was retreating. Throughout Sarah's recovery, flowers arrived weekly at their apartment, beautiful arrangements with no card, no indication of their sender. But Emma knew. Just as she knew about the envelope that arrived containing the deed to their apartment building, now owned by a corporation with an Italian name, with a note stating that their rent had been paid in full for the next 10 years. 6 months after Emma's desperate visit to Salvatore Ricci, Sarah Matthews was declared in remission. She returned to work at St. Mary's, unaware that her position had been protected by forces far more powerful than hospital administration, unaware that her daughter had made a deal with the most dangerous man in the city. Emma never saw Salvatore Ricci again, not up close, at least. But sometimes, on her way home from school, she would notice a black sedan parked across the street. Once, she thought she glimpsed him inside, watching as she and her mother walked hand in hand. She had waved, just slightly, and though she couldn't be sure, she thought he might have nodded in return before the car pulled away. Life returned to normal for the Matthews women. Sarah never questioned their sudden good fortune too deeply, attributing it to the generosity of the hospital's charitable foundation. Emma let her believe it. After all, her mother had taught her that sometimes the truth wasn't as important as protecting the people you love. 3 years later, Emma was walking home from school alone, a privilege recently granted now that she was 11, when a boy from the high school tried to snatch her backpack. Before she could even scream, 2 men in suits appeared from nowhere. They didn't touch the boy, didn't say a word to him. They simply stood there, their presence enough to send him running. One of the men tipped his hat to Emma before they both disappeared around the corner. That night, Emma took out Mr. Ricci's card from her treasure box and ran her fingers over the faded writing on the back. It wasn't a phone number as she had initially thought, but a single word, family. In the years that followed, Emma would come to understand what that word meant to men like Salvatore Ricci. She would learn about the code he lived by, the debts that could never be repaid, the bonds that were stronger than blood. She would learn that sometimes, the monsters in the stories weren't monsters at all, but complicated men with their own sense of honor, their own definition of justice. On her 18th birthday, as Emma prepared to leave for college, her tuition mysteriously covered by a scholarship she didn't remember applying for, a package arrived. Inside was an antique gold locket. When she opened it, she found a tiny photograph of her grandfather as a young man, standing beside another young man she recognized immediately despite the decades that had passed. There was no note, no card. None was needed. Sarah Matthews lived to see her daughter graduate from medical school, to dance at her wedding, to hold her first grandchild. She lived a full life, never knowing how close she had come to losing it all, never knowing that her father's long-ago act of courage had saved not only Salvatore Ricci's life but, decades later, her own. And Salvatore? He remained the most powerful man in the city until his death at the age of 78. His funeral was attended by hundreds, politicians, businessmen, and criminals alike. But standing at the back of the church, unnoticed by most, was a woman in her 30s with blonde hair and a kind face. She stayed only long enough to place a single white rose on his casket before slipping away. The rose had a small card attached. It contained just one word, family. In a world where lines between good and evil blur, where debts span generations, and where salvation comes from the most unexpected places, Emma Matthews learned that sometimes the most powerful force isn't money or fear or influence, it's the promise made to a dying man, the obligation to protect what he loved, the understanding that family transcends blood and time and circumstance. And in the end, isn't that what we're all searching for? Connection. Protection. The knowledge that we matter to someone, that our lives have meaning beyond our own small circles. So the next time you pass judgment on someone based on rumors or reputation, remember the story of Emma Matthews and Salvatore Ricci. Remember that heroes come in unlikely packages, that redemption can be found in the smallest of gestures, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the monster under the bed is actually the guardian at the gate. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales that remind us of our shared humanity, our capacity for compassion, and the unexpected ways our lives intersect with others. Until next time, remember, not all angels have wings, and not all saviors wear halos.